Right. So this program is all about storytelling, and I'm going to start by telling you a story. But before I tell you that story, I'm going to reemphasize what I've been saying all along, which is while I'm telling this story, take a moment, go to the chat box, tell us why storytelling is important. But I'm going to actually start this webinar on storytelling with a story. And this is a story that if you've been to one of our programs, you've probably heard this story. In our programs, we make the point that it's important in a presentation to keep your message to 3 points. We think it's very important in presentations to keep your message to 3 points. And I like to make that point. And I also like to make the point that coming up with 3 points is actually pretty easy to do. It's not that hard to come up with 3 points. And so I tell the following story about how easy it is to come up with 3 points. Several years ago, my daughter was running for secretary of the 5th grade class at Dunwoody Springs Elementary School. My daughter's name is Annie. She was running for secretary of the 5th grade class at Dunwoody Springs. And she had to give a speech. And the speech, she had to give a speech. It was like a political speech, why they should vote for her. And so I went up to her bedroom while she was working on her speech. And she had her speech written on a little piece of notebook paper. And so since I'm a public speaking teacher, public speaking coach, I figure I'm going to help my daughter out. I'm going to be the dad of the year. So I read her speech, and her speech was, it was terrible, actually. It was actually a terrible, terrible speech. And so I immediately, being the really sensitive dad that I am, started giving her all this critical feedback. And my daughter, Annie, who was 10, got really mad. She yelled at me. She told me I was being mean, and she ran out of the room and slammed the door. And so I followed her, and I said, "Hey, Annie, I'm really sorry. Could we start again?" I said, "Annie, if you could only remember 3 things or 3 reasons why they should vote for you, what would they be?" And she knew immediately. She said, "Oh, that's easy. They should vote for me because, number 1, I'm going to work hard." I said, "That sounds good." I said, "What's the second reason?" She said, "The second reason they should vote for me is because I'm going to be a good listener." I'm like, "That sounds good." "What's the third one?" She said, "They should vote for me because I'm going to make sure we keep the bathrooms clean." And so my point is that when I asked her to think about what are her 3 key messages, she quickly came up with those 3 key messages. It's easy to do. That's my point. And so that's sort of the basic story that we're going to sort of be working from here. We're going to talk a little bit about that story and sort of what makes that story good and why that story worked well. At least I hope you find it good. We've been using it, and it usually gets a really good reaction. And so we're going to spend some time talking about that story and what makes a good story. In fact, we're going to talk about 3 particular things. The first thing we're going to talk about is why stories are important. We're going to talk about, what makes a good story and how to tell a story. And then we're going to talk about how to make your story good. How to make your story good. So those are the 3 things that we're going to talk about. So let's start with why are stories important. JD, we've gotten a lot of people go into our chat box. What are some of the things that people have said about why are stories important?
I'm going to read one from Todd Sweet because I just think it's really funny. It just says stories are more interesting than org charts. I think that's number 1.
Amen.
But there's a lot of them here that helps people identify with the point you're trying to get across. And that was from Gail Stowers, if I get your name right. And Bill said people relate better to their stories. I think we all kind of get that we relate better. I guess let me ask Gail, if you could unmute yourself. I think this is pretty interesting here, and I think this is something people forget about in the business world is, Gail, why does it help people identify with the point? Just unmute yourself and kind of briefly tell us.
Well, I believe that it helps people to identify with the point because sometimes what you're saying as a presenter is a little fuzzy in the head of your audience. And so as you begin to share a story, it brings clarity.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for that, Gail. Appreciate that.
All right, very good. Any other things that jump out at you, JD?
A lot of them in that same kind of thing, bringing clarity, making it more visual, that better connection. It's just kind of all the same thing, but really great. Stories help you. Hydrick Patel, stories make you visualize better. Yeah, I think that's a really awesome one too as well. We visualize what you're talking about, not just a generic description.
JD, those of you who may or may not have met JD. JD for many years had his own sales training company, for many years, and so has worked a lot with salespeople. JD, why are stories important for salespeople?
Well, I mean, I would say probably number one, obviously there's a lot of these things in here that I think make sense, but for salespeople, a lot of times when you're pitching to people, you're telling them what you can do, but stories are proof and evidence that you do it. So they really hammer home that you actually do this, and it makes it real for the client. And I think that's what a lot of salespeople miss. If you've ever been in sales or not been in sales, I think a lot of us have heard the old adage of data tells and stories sell. And it goes to that point. It really brings to life what you can do and makes it real.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned data tells and stories sell. What about data? I have a question for people who are online. How many of you use a lot of data in your presentations? And as a corollary to that, how many of you find data really interesting in presentations? If you find a data to be really, really interesting in presentations, give me a 1. If you find it not interesting in presentations, give me a 0. So 1 means you like it. 0.
I got a 0 really quickly.
All right, well, we're getting a lot of 1s, so people like it. People find they like it. There's one person who gave it a 0.
Well, did we ask that question right? Do they like using it or do they like hearing it?
Okay, so yeah, maybe I should ask the question again. If you like it and you like hearing it, put a 1. Means you like it and you like hearing it. If you don't like it, put a 0. Don't like hearing it, put a 0. So now it's a little bit more even. It's a little more. So maybe I didn't ask the question well.
Asia is very consistent on her answer, though.
somebody gave it a 0.5. Somebody gave it a 0.5. So they were like, you're trying to split the difference there. Well, yeah, that's a good one. All right.
I guess maybe poll the group here, and feel free to unmute yourself for this. Even though you like data, but presenting data, let's put it in that context. When you're presenting data, what's a challenge when you're presenting data?
So here, Rachel Chang had a really interesting point here. Rachel, I'm going to can I put you on the spot here, Rachel, and ask you to unmute? You said it's not as long. It's as long as it's not as not too dense of data. Rachel, are you there?
Yeah.
Could you explain what you mean by that? That's a really good point.
Well, numbers are usually, like someone else said, numbers don't lie, so it can be very helpful when using data in a presentation. As long as it's not a whole presentation of just numbers. So if there's a few numbers that stand out or anything that you want to highlight or like big picture numbers that can get the point across, that's usually what's most helpful and most interesting.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's a good point. It's a good point. A lot of people like data, and I know that in business today we use data. I don't want to go on record as saying we don't think you should use data. We think you should use data. In fact, I've written a whole book on how to use data in a presentation. The main thing that I would say about data and using data in a presentation is you need to leaven it with stories. You need to have both. You need to have data, but you need to bring the data to life with stories. One of the challenges with data is that people often will argue with your data, and they may not agree with your data. I think one of these points, somebody pointed out how people can cherry pick data. I forgot who meant. I saw this come across in one of the chat.
And it gets up a little bit further.
Yeah, I think people cherry pick the data, and so that people can be skeptical of your data. And so what we think you should be thinking about is coupling your data with a story. So if the data says X, then say, this is what the data says. In fact, and let me tell you a story that illustrates how that is true. So I think that, you know, as JD said, data tells, but stories sell. You can use the data, but then you need to put that story in there to sort of bring it to life with the data. Sometimes I'll use an analogy I call my waffle analogy. I assume everybody here likes waffles. I'm a big waffle guy myself. I love waffles, but you can't have waffles without syrup. You need to have the waffles and the syrup. The waffle is fine, but you can't have it without the syrup. And of course, you're not going to eat the syrup without the waffle. You need both. They go together. They complement each other. And it's the same thing with data and stories. As JD says, data sells and stories sell. You need waffles and the syrup. You need them together. So we've talked about why the stories are important. Let's talk about now what is a story? What do we mean by a story? What makes a good story? And so there are a lot of, you can go on, you can read a lot about this. You can read our books and find out how to define a story. There's a lot of them. I think they're all basic. All these definitions of stories are basically the same. But what a story basically is you're going to make a point using a person or a company, and you're going to make that point using that person and showing how they're navigating through the world. Let me say that again. You're going to make a point using a person or a company, and you're going to show that person navigating through the world. So let's go back to the story that I used at the beginning about my daughter, Annie. Who was the person navigating through the world? Well, the point, remember, we're making the point, and the point is it's easy to come up with 3 points. Now I could have just said, well, it's easy to come up with 3 points. All you got to do is think of 3 points. It's very easy. Instead, what I said is, no, I'm going to tell a story that shows a person navigating their way through the world. Well, who's the person? Well, in this case, it was me and my daughter, Annie, showing us navigating our way through the world. That is a story in that sense. So that's sort of the fundamental idea here. Give me an example of a story that, we work with a lot of clients trying to help them come up with stories. And some of them have a little bit of difficulty with this issue of making it about a person or company navigating their way through the world. What are some of the typical things that we see?
Well, a lot of it, I guess I would say this, going to, I would say probably technical, let's use a technical example. I think a lot of people get too caught up in talking about the process itself. So they'll say, well, what we do is we send the data over here and then it doesn't get translated right. And then when we get it, we have trouble with it. We get this usually some generic, general, boring description. And I mean, I guess I asked this just as a show of ones, does that create a real visual for you? Is it a real visual? Or does it just seem kind of just, kind of process, nothing there? That's typically what we get. We don't get a lot of detail. It's like somebody, if I said, Asia, I'm just going to pick on you just because you got that friendly face from last time. But if I say, Asia, where'd you go on vacation? She wouldn't go, I went up north. It wouldn't just be this bland description. And that's typically what we find when we're working with people.
Yeah, and so what we need to do if you're going to tell a story well is you're going to have to take a person or a company, and you're going to have to put them into a situation, and there has to be a little plot. And there has to be a little plot where they navigate their way through the world. And so we've actually got a basic plot for you that you can use anytime. This is, I can't say that we've invented this because there's lots of these kind of things that are out there, but they all follow the basic same structure, the basic plot structure, which is you start with the point, and then you're going to describe the situation, then the action, then the result. Point, situation, action, result. That's the basic plot that all of these follow. By the way, if some of you have been through interview training, this is the same kind of thing that you'll see. But it's make the point. It's make your point, situation, action, result. So let's go to my example with my daughter Annie. What was the point? I made the point. The point was it's easy to come up with your 3 point. What's the situation? I described the situation about how my daughter, Annie, was running for secretary of the 5th grade class, and she had to give a speech. So that's the situation. And we talk about the action. Well, I sat and I interacted with her, and I helped her out, and the result was it was easy for her to come up with her 3 points. JD, how do you help your clients, help our clients when they have to come up with 3 points?
Yes, and I'll reverse this, but let me give you a version of bad right now. If Joey's going to ask me that, how we help with clients speak better, my bad description or bad story would just be, well, we work with people in our workshops, we put them on camera, and then we give them feedback about how well they look and sound, and then we coach them through that for the whole day, and usually they get better. That would be a bad version and more of a process statement of what we do.
Yeah, and that's not the problem with that is that he hasn't really taken a person and put them into a situation. Again, a story involves a person. My favorite movie is the movie Jaws. Well, it's about people who are, it's about, they have a main character, and the main character is the chief of the police department, Chief Brody. It's about him sort of navigating his way through. You have to have a main character. And so in this case, JD's story doesn't have much of a main character. So how can we make that better, JD?
So the way I would tell that story, well, let's just walk it through. So situation would be, last year, I was working with a woman named Charlene, who's a big executive at a really large Fortune 500 firm. Amazing presenter, very engaging, makes great eye contact, great hand gestures, super great voice inflection, very confident woman. When we started asking her questions, so the problem was when we started asking her really challenging questions, instead of talking with this dynamic body and really getting into it, she put her hands down in front of her. She kind of leaned over a little bit. So that was the problem. We said, well, wait, what's going on here? And what we did, we found out that after asking Charlene why she did that, she said she gets uncomfortable with Q&A. So her body language reflects that discomfort. So what we did is we worked with her a little bit and said, okay, when you're answering Q&A, it's still about having that confidence so that when you're answering the questions, people really feel like you know what you're talking about. So we were able to take her, not only was she dynamic in which she's presenting, but when we asked challenging questions, she still had that really nice confidence, nice presence and energy, or what you would call executive presence.
Yeah, so there's a much, much better story. And why? Because now we've got a situation, we've got actually two main characters in JD's story. We've got JD, who is a character. He's the one who's the coach. But then you've got Charlene, who's also navigating her way through the world, and together, and so now the situation was that she was not presenting particularly well in this one particular circumstance. She got some feedback, we had a discussion, and now she's doing much better. So situation, action, result. This is sort of the basic pattern, the basic plot that you're going to see in a lot of these classic sort of business stories. It's a situation, then an action, and then a result. So that's sort of the basic idea here. Let's go to the last part, the last point I want to make.
Okay, let's stop there for a second. Does anybody have any questions? Because I know we're probably from all different industries. Some people are going to be in sales. Some people are trying maybe just pitching for budget within their company, or they're talking to their board, or they're just trying to get some initiative passed, like so they can move to the next stage. Does anybody have any questions how stories maybe relate to the different environments that you work in?
Well, here's a really interesting comment from Renisha.
Oh, here you go.
Renisha said, in essence, a story adds a theatrical feel to what otherwise would just be a script. Is that okay to say? That's absolutely correct. That is absolutely correct, Renisha. Renisha, are you there? Can you unmute?
Hi.
So tell me what you mean. By the way, wow, great background. You're not really at the beach, are you, or are you?
In my heart, I'm at the beach.
You're at the beach. Okay. You live at your heart is at the beach. Okay. Well, I think a lot of us feel that way. What do you mean by this? This is an interesting comment.
What I want to layer this comment with is, even in telling a story and the theatrical feel, I feel it's very important to add that voice inflection. And if you're talking about two characters, perhaps change your voice up so that Renisha does not sound like Joey in the story, or Renisha does not sound like JD. You actually feel the interaction of two people exchanging dialogue, even in your story, two different objects, so to say. Yeah,
so it's a really interesting point. So thank you for that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. One way to think about that is you just made me think about this. I'm a big listener to books on tape. They're not on tape anymore, but on audio books or whatever they call them. And one of the things I really love is a good book reader. Somebody who reads the book well. I don't know if any of you guys have listened to the Harry Potter books, but there's a guy named Jim Dale who has read all of those books. And he's fantastic, and he does exactly what Renisha talked about, which is he enacts the voice, he reenacts the voice, and sort of how you deliver the message is really, really an important point. So thank you for that, Renisha. That's a really, really good point. Let's move to the last bit, and I think this is relevant to what Renisha just said, which is how do you make the story really, really good? Well, one thing you got to do is you got to do what Renisha said, which is you've got to sort of add some well, what my grandmother would call schmaltz. You got to add some schmaltz to the story. Schmaltz, for those of you who don't know, many of you, I'm sure, probably do know. Schmaltz is rendered chicken fat, but it's kind of what you could smear it on a bagel and it tastes good. And this is kind of what you're doing with what Renisha is talking about, is sort of adding some flavor to the story so that you sound good and you're putting some energy in your voice and all this kind of stuff. So that's the idea here, is you got to sort of add some energy. The other thing you got to do is you got to practice. You got to practice your stories. JD and I, we spend a lot of time doing this. So we spend a lot of time practicing what we're going to say. These good stories are really, really well practiced. What else can we do, JD, to really make our stories even better?
Well, I think number one is details. The example I like to use is, I don't know, by a show of ones, just put a 1 in there if you've ever been to the Atlanta airport. Back when people used to fly. Okay, now I want to just we'll do a quick poll here, okay? I'm going to give you two kind of descriptions, and you tell me which one resonates better. You're going to give me a 1 for the first one or 2 for the second one. So, and it's going to be very short, but just a quick example. Now, if I say I was at the Atlanta airport in January, okay, it's going to be very short. Or I say I was at the Atlanta airport in January on Monday morning at 7 a.m. in the TSA security line. Which one of those resonates more in your head? Number 1 or number 2?
Yeah, they're all number 2.
Number 2. That's the importance of details. I think too often what we do, Joey, is I think we just say stuff and we try to leave it up to the listener to kind of fill in the visual gaps. And I think what the details do is help put your listener there. And that was like a lot of the comments that came early on, is just, it makes that better connection with people. So it's got to have some details.
Well, so here's a great example right now from the chat box. Morgan Hurley said that I'm going to guess. I'm not sure if Morgan is a male or female, because it's sort of one of those names that can go either way. Morgan, you met Kanye West in the Atlanta airport. Can you unmute?
Yeah.
Okay, Morgan. You met Kanye, so I need you to tell me about meeting Conway. And since we've been talking about storytelling, give me some detail.
So this was back in probably like 2004, like before he got big, and he was with like a couple of bodyguards, and I was waiting for my plane, and I went up to him and asked him for his autograph, and he said no.
Okay. All right. Let's see. And so then what happened? What happened next?
I walked away. I think I was scared.
Okay, but that's a great story. That's a great story. And I think
Joey, let's put this in the context though. So the situation was, right? So the details. 2004, you ran into Kanye. He had some bodyguards, and you asked for his autograph. What was the problem, Morgan? You didn't get one.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what was the result?
I was bummed that I didn't get an autograph.
There
I
you
walked
go.
away.
Yeah, you walked away. Actually, a nice little story there.
Very good.
Yeah, nice little
Oh,
story.
I love this. Alicia, if I'm pronouncing it right, that's so Kanye.
Yeah, I did the same thing.
I love that one. That was good.
If it makes you feel better, Morgan, I was at Lenox Square Mall several years ago, and I saw Shaquille O'Neal, and I wanted to get his autograph. And I really love Shaquille O'Neal because I think he's great on TV. And wow, he wasn't friendly.
Really?
Yeah, he wasn't friendly at all. We asked for his autograph, and a bodyguard blocked us. So. I don't know. Maybe he's friendly for other people.
Yeah.
That day to us.
Yeah, it's funny.
But once again, it's those details that really make the story good. I will say that the other thing, just to keep going, I hate to keep picking on you here, Morgan. It's when you say you met Kanye West, that's a statement. But then when you built it up with, I saw him, we're in I think you said you were in the line waiting for him, whatever. All of those details are what make it good. It good. So, well done. Thank you for the story about Kanye.
Yep.
We're running out of time. Does anybody else have any questions about storytelling? Great details. Yes, I agree with Renisha here. Udi said, but you do have a great story. Yes, completely agree. Joshua said, bold characters, rich symbolism equals memorable action. Jesus taught in parables, which are usually, yeah. So this is another thing that a lot of morals and morality. You say Jesus taught in parables, but it's not just Jesus. I mean, a lot of religious figures use stories and parables and things like that. The Bible is filled with stories, of course. So that's a really good point as well. We're getting ready to wrap up. Anything else, JD, that we should say before we end the call?
No, I think just thinking of the key things is that knowing that stories really do connect with people. I always think about this is in terms of that. In our everyday life, we tell stories all the time, and we're usually really good at the details. We just got to remember that stories are important in a business context. They do bring it to life. They do make a better connection. You really want to have a story that really hammers home the situation, the action, and the result to give you some structure to the story in the business context. And the last one is don't forget the details. The details are what bring it to life. Give us those good details that really make it visual for us. But we're excited to have everybody on a Friday. I hope everyone has an awesome weekend. If you're in Georgia, we are getting out and about, and apparently if you're in Oklahoma, they're full on. They're going at it. So if you're in Oklahoma, God love you. We're having fun. Anyway, well, thanks for joining us, guys. We really enjoyed having you. Good to see some familiar faces, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you all.